Are you considering buying Deadside? In this video, I'm gonna give you a full review of the game. We're gonna look at the pros and cons and everything you need to know before you buy Deadside. But is it actually worth playing? Let's find out. I run Game Creator here. Deadside is an open world survival game all about completing missions while killing other players and getting loot. Deadside is a hardcore survival game with a heavy focus on PvE and PvP content. And when you first spawn in, you have nothing, and you quickly have to run to a nearby town and gather resources, weapons, and armor. And this is a big part of the early game. Now another part is the so-called safe zones. Here you can store any loot you have picked up while playing, so you can save it for later. You can also buy and sell items at this vendor, and this is one of the ways to generate cash in the game, but you also have missions. See, unlike most other survival games in this genre, like DayZ, in Deadside you can still find and buy loot, but you can also complete missions. And these missions are spread across the entire map and can range anywhere between easy and very hard. In the missions, you usually have to defeat a certain number of AI enemies defending a stronghold, and then upon defeating the enemies you'll be rewarded weapons, random loot, and a lot of cash. And you can of course then use this cash to buy more stuff. Now exploration is a big part of the game. You can run around from town to town, find loot, combat enemies, and of course explore the entire map. Now Deadside is not super player friendly. The game itself is fine, but the other players are of course trying to kill you, and while you're still figuring out the controls, the movement, and how everything works, there'll be a lot of people trying to kill you and steal your loot. Also, as I mentioned before, you have safe zones, but people can actually camp at those safe zones and then kill you when you run up to try and save your loot. But we will talk about that a bit more later on. Now Deadside is an early access game, and therefore it is not super varied in content. You can play the game a lot. You can play for hundreds if not thousands of hours, but there's not that many different things to do. You have your missions, you have your PvE, your PvP, some base building, so quite basic. But if you really like that content, you will absolutely love the game. On Deadside you can also build bases. This requires a few tools and nails, which can all be bought at the safe zones. And the base allows for more space to hold loot, since the inventory for storing loot in the safe zone is quite small. Now base building is very tedious and takes a long time to gather the wood needed. Now a very interesting part of base mechanic is the raiding aspect, and raiding in Deadside is very different compared to most other games. Other players cannot just randomly raid your base. Upon a player's death, there's a 10% chance of that player dropping a raid token, and if another player picks that token up and activates it, the entire server can now see where the base is for a short time frame. And this makes for some really epic battles where multiple teams flock to a base location and a massive shootout takes place. This does also mean that if you haven't died in a while, your base will be completely safe from being raided while you sleep. And this is a really cool way of adding base protection in my opinion, and it's definitely one of the things that other games could look to try and implement. If you find this video useful so far, make sure to boop the like button, as it really helps out the channel. Thank you so much. Now for multiplayer, there are two types of servers. You have official and private servers. Official servers are on average more streamlined to the base game, but they also have more cheaters, and they also have less rules and regulations, and this also makes it possible to camp at safe zones. So as a new player, I would highly recommend not playing on official servers, because there'll be a lot of cheaters and also a lot of people camping at safe zones, which will make it very difficult to save your loot, and you will die a lot of times. Private servers are usually better, and especially as a new player, but try and find a private server with close to vanilla settings. Now the graphics in Deadside is actually pretty good. They're of course not the best I've ever seen, but they are good enough that the game is definitely playable. The sound is also really good. There's a lot of world noise. You can for instance hear the humming sound of a transmission tower. There's also a lot of ambient noises like footsteps, squirrels, or small animals, and all of these add to the realism and the immersion of the game. Also, another thing is the in-game map. It's actually really good. You have multiple functions, for instance adding multiple marker points on the map so you can track your waypoints, which is a great addition to these kind of games here. Now let's look at some pros and cons of the game, shall we? First off, the pros. The game is highly engaging. You will always be fighting something, whether it's players or AI. There's very few dull moments because you have missions in the game, so while you're completing missions or you're running to a mission, you will encounter enemies constantly. And this is a big improvement over other games like Scum or DayZ, where the action can be quite slow. You can sometimes have hours without meeting anything to kill. Due to the way Deadside is set up with the AI and the missions, it is a lot more engaging. Another pro is the raid system. This is a fantastic way of adding raid protection, and it also adds in these massive shootouts where entire servers can flock to one location because of a raid token being activated. And for me, this is one of the biggest pros of the game. I hope to see more games like this add this feature or something similar. Another pro is very few bugs. It is surprisingly smooth for an early access game. Now the servers are quite unstable, but the mechanics are pretty smooth, and I was pleasantly surprised by how well they function. Now let's look at the cons. First of all is there's a kind of pay to win DLC. So for $20 you can basically upgrade your kit. You can get more storage in the safe zone, and you can also start with a compass and binoculars when you spawn in. These are actually unbelievably powerful and can make the game a lot easier, especially when you're playing with other players, as you can quicker call out player locations with compass directions. Now the compass and binoculars can be found in game, but they are quite rare to find. So there's a little bit of pay to win. It's not terrible, but it's a fairly big con in my opinion. Also another con, there's just too much loot. When you play the game a lot, you'll start noticing that there's just too many weapons. And I wish the weapons, resources, and armor were just more rare in general, as you can quickly stack up a massive amount. Now of course early game you don't really see that, but when you play the game a lot, you do a lot of missions, you will notice that there's just too much loot. And then probably my biggest con is that the servers are quite unstable, and desyncs and disconnects can occur quite often. Also there's a lot of cheaters on the official servers. So the game mechanics are good, but there's definitely some server issues that need to be sorted out. But this also ties into what I said earlier. As a new player, definitely play on private servers. You don't want to be camped near the safe zones. Also there are less cheaters. Now let's grade the game, shall we? The first thing we're looking at is gameplay. That's the most important aspect of the game. You can get through almost anything as long as you have good gameplay mechanics, and if the game works as intended. And for gameplay, I'm gonna give Deadside a C. So the mechanics they have in game are really good, but I just want more gameplay overall, more variety in content. You do feel sometimes that it definitely is an early access game, as there are just certain things lagging. I truly believe that in a few years of development, this game will actually be fantastic, but as for making this right now, I have to rate it as C. The next thing we're looking at is the graphics, the sound, and immersion. And this is actually a really good part of the game. The graphics are nice, the sound is really good, there's a good atmosphere and immersive part to the entire game due to the sound effect. And here I'm actually gonna give Deadside a B. I'm a fan of it. I really enjoyed it. It felt immersive, authentic, but I am also a sucker for these kind of games. And the final thing we're looking at is progression and replayability. So does your effort feel meaningful, and can you play it for a long time? Now this one's gonna be very subjective. For some players this will be an A+, and for others there will be an F grade. For me right now, I'm gonna give it a C grade. And that also ties into what I said before in terms of lacking overall content. So if there was just more content to do, there'll be more replayability. And also in terms of progression, once you play the game a lot, it's a bit too easy to stack up on a lot of really good gear. So the first 10 or 20 hours feels really good in terms of progression, but then after that, as you play the game a lot, there's just too much loot from the missions. So the overall grade of Deadside is a C+. Now the game has not been out for that long as of making this, and the game has great potential. So if you enjoy other games like Scum, Rust, or DayZ, you will definitely love this game as well. It has great mechanics, and it runs surprisingly smooth for an early access game. And for a game that only costs $20, it is absolutely worth buying. And I personally have high hopes for this game. It has a ton of potential. If you're still considering buying the game, I would recommend just go ahead and do it, as the game is definitely worth the money and time. And I would not be surprised that in a few years from now, this C+ grade would go all the way up to a B or even an A. If you enjoyed this video, also make sure to check out the video on the screen now, as I think you'll also really enjoy that game review. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.